Imagine a world forgotten, not a world buried under the shifting sands of a desert or drowned beneath the dark waves of an ocean, but a world that vanished into the light. A world of eternal spring, bathed in the glow of a sun that never set, where the air was sweet with the scent of flowers that do not exist anymore. This is not a place you can find on any map drawn by human hands, for its geography is woven from memory, myth, and longing. It exists in the whispers of the wind that howls over the Arctic ice, in the strange, impossible maps drawn by ancient scholars who believed in a land beyond the north wind. We have given this ghost of a civilization a name, Hyperborea. It is a dream of a golden age, a haunting melody from a time before history began, a polar paradise that calls to us from the white, silent heart of the world. To speak of Hyperborea is to chase a shadow at the edge of the world, to follow a trail of clues written in ice and legend, leading us to the ultimate question. What if, at the very top of our planet, a magnificent and advanced culture once flourished, only to be erased by time and cataclysm, leaving behind nothing but echoes in our oldest stories? This is the journey to find them. Our story does not begin with a shovel striking stone or a radar pinging deep under the ice. It begins with a word, a name spoken into the cold, clear air of ancient Greece over 2,000 years ago. Hyperborea. It is a beautiful, flowing word that means beyond the north wind. The north wind, to the Greeks, was the fierce Boreas, a god who brought winter's bitter chill from the frozen mountains of Thrace. To live beyond him was to live in a place he could not touch, a sanctuary from storms and snow. This was not a land they claimed to have visited themselves. It was a story told to them by others, a rumor of perfection that lived on the lips of traders and in the scrolls of curious scholars. The picture they painted was mesmerizing. Hyperborea was a circular continent, a perfect disk suspended at the top of the world, centered directly on the North Pole. Here, the sun rose and set only once a year, meaning it enjoyed 6 months of continuous daylight, a land of midnight sun where darkness was a stranger. The climate was miraculously mild, a paradise of gentle breezes and fertile soil that yielded 2 harvests in a single summer. The people, the Hyperboreans, were said to be giants, not in a monstrous way, but in stature and spirit. They lived for 1,000 years in unbroken peace and happiness, free from disease, war, and the hard labor that defined life elsewhere. They were a people dedicated to the arts, to music, and most of all to the worship of the sun god Apollo. Greek legends said Apollo would travel to Hyperborea in his chariot of fire, drawn by swans, every winter to enjoy the company of these blessed people. They sent mysterious gifts south, hidden in bundles of wheat, to his shrine on the island of Delos. But no one knew exactly how these gifts arrived. The Hyperboreans themselves remained shrouded in mist, a vision of an ideal life, a mirror held up to show the ancient world what humanity could be without suffering. This was the first layer of the myth, a poetic vision of a utopia. Yet even in these early tales, there are strange, concrete details that prick the imagination. The circular shape of the continent, centered on the pole. The description of the singular, peculiar solar cycle. These are not just pretty fantasies, they are specific observations, as if someone long ago was trying to describe a real, but utterly alien, geography to people who had never seen anything like it. The Greeks placed Hyperborea in the far north, but their north was a vague and terrifying unknown, a space on the map labeled simply "Here be monsters." The Hyperboreans were the opposite of monsters. They were the pinnacle of civilization. So the seed was planted. A perfect land at the impossible, frozen top of the world, waiting to be discovered not just in story, but perhaps in truth. The astonishing truth about Hyperborea is that the Greeks were not alone. Their story was not a singular invention, but a single thread in a vast, global tapestry of memory. If you listen closely to the oldest stories of peoples scattered across the northern hemisphere, a common chord resonates, a haunting memory of an original homeland, far to the north, from which they were driven by a great and terrible change. It is as if a colossal bell once rang at the pole, and its echo, now faint and distorted, can be heard in the mythologies of countless cultures. The ancient Hindus sang of Uttarakuru, a continent in the far north where the ancestors lived in bliss, where a single day and night lasted a year, and where trees bore fruit of gold. The Persian Aryanam Vija, the mythical cradle of the Aryan people, was described in the sacred Zoroastrian texts as a perfect land of 10 months winter and 2 months summer, struck by an Angra Mainyu, a fiendish spirit, who brought a deadly frost that made it uninhabitable, forcing the great migration southward. In China, legends whisper of a far northern empire of immense beings with advanced knowledge. The Norse, of course, gave us the most vivid and powerful northern mythology. While Asgard was the home of the gods, there was another place, a primal, icy realm of origin. And in their tales of the world's creation, they spoke of the Ginnungagap, the yawning void, and from the melting ice in the north, the first giant, Ymir, was formed. This north was not just empty ice. It was a source of primordial power and life. But the most compelling echoes come not from grand empires, but from the peoples who live in the Arctic's embrace today. The Inuit have stories of a time when their lands were warmer, of a distant past when the first people came from a now vanished land. The Sami of Scandinavia revere the north as a sacred direction, the home of divine powers. Perhaps the most striking parallel comes from the indigenous peoples of Siberia, like the Yakuts and the Samoyedic tribes. Their folklore is rich with tales of a white island or a land of white waters in the frozen sea, a place of immense spiritual power and ancient ancestors. They describe a great whirlpool at the top of the world, a concept eerily similar to ancient Greek maps that showed a vast whirlpool surrounding the circular continent of Hyperborea. These are not stories borrowed from books. These are oral traditions passed down through hundreds of generations, around campfires in the deepest cold, preserving a memory so old it has become bone. What could have planted this same profound idea? A benevolent, advanced, or sacred origin point at the North Pole, in the minds of cultures separated by continents and oceans, who had no possible contact with each other in the ancient past. Scholars call it convergent mythology, the idea that similar environments produce similar stories. But the Arctic is not a gentle environment that suggests a paradise. It is a harsh, brutal teacher of survival. The stories of a northern paradise contradict the very reality these peoples lived in. Unless, of course, the stories are not about the Arctic as it is now, but as it once was. This global chorus of northern origin myths forms the first major pillar in the mystery of Hyperborea. It suggests that the Greek tales were not mere philosophical fantasies. but the refined, literary version of a much older, much more widespread human memory. A memory of a cataclysm that shattered a homeland and scattered its children to the winds, carrying with them fragments of a lost golden age. The myth begins to feel less like a story and more like a legacy. If myths are the soul of the Hyperborean mystery, then maps are its skeleton, the hard, stubborn framework upon which the dream was draped. For centuries, across different cultures, the human instinct to chart the unknown kept returning to the same bizarre vision of the Arctic. Long before satellites or polar expeditions, map makers filled the blank space at the top of the world with a geography of legend, and the consistency of their errors is more telling than any truth. The most famous of these is the Mercator map of 1595. Gerardus Mercator was a supremely practical and scientific cartographer, yet on his monumental world map, he depicts the North Pole as a massive black rock mountain rising from the sea. Surrounding it are 4 fierce straits, dividing 4 large, fertile islands or continents. This was not his invention. In careful notes, Mercator cited as his source a lost book called the Inventio Fortunata, a 14th century travelogue that claimed to detail a journey to the Arctic regions. This source described the pole itself as a magnetic black rock of staggering size, and the surrounding lands as populous and green. Even earlier in the 1500s, cartographers like Gerardus's predecessor, Johannes Reich, drew maps showing the pole as surrounded by a ring of land, broken by 4 inward flowing rivers. This configuration, a central peak, 4 surrounding lands and 4 symmetric sea channels, is a shockingly common motif. To understand why, we must look even further back to the Middle Ages and the TO maps. These schematic maps showed the world as a circle, with a T inside dividing the continents. The East was at the top, and often at the very top, the northern apex. They placed the earthly paradise, the Garden of Eden itself. Many medieval scholars, interpreting the Bible literally, believed Eden was a real, physical place, untouched by the Great Flood, and that it must be located at the farthest, most inaccessible point, the North Pole. This was not just Christian thinking. Islamic geographers like Al-Idrisi also described a circular mountain range encircling the known world, a concept mirroring the ancient Greek idea of the Okeanos, the world-encircling river. The Arctic in this worldview was the roof of the world, a protected basin. So when Renaissance mapmakers like Mercator tried to synthesize ancient Greek texts, like the voyages of Pytheas who spoke of a congealed sea north of Thule, with medieval travel accounts and biblical lore, they produced maps that were hybrids of report, rumor, and deep-seated tradition. They were mapping a collective memory. The 4 rivers flowing from a central source directly mirror the 4 rivers said to flow from the Garden of Eden in the book of Genesis. The circular continent mirrors the Greek Hyperborea. The magnetic black mountain echoes tales of a mysterious lodestone that could pull the metal from ships, a legend found in Norse and Arabic sailing stories alike. These maps were, in a sense, the best scientific conclusions of their day, incorporating all available data. The data, however, was steeped in myth. Yet this raises a haunting possibility. What if these myths were themselves based on observations from a much older, now lost era of exploration? What if the Inventio Fortunata was recording, however distortedly, a genuine geography from a time when the Arctic climate was different? The maps stand as silent, ornate witnesses. They are not proof of Hyperborea, but they are proof of a profound and persistent belief, spanning millennia and disciplines, that the top of the world was not an empty, frozen desert, but a structured, significant, and perhaps even habitable space. They represent humanity's stubborn refusal to believe the North was simply empty. It was a place that had to be filled with something magnificent, because something in our oldest stories insisted it once was. To build a civilization, you need a habitable land. This is the most formidable barrier to the reality of Hyperborea. The Arctic today is a merciless, frozen expanse. But what if the map of the world and its climate was once dramatically different? Here, the myth collides with a stunning and undeniable scientific truth. The Arctic was not always a wasteland of ice. It was once a thriving, green, temperate paradise. This is not speculation. It is a fact written in stone and soil, locked deep within the planet's memory. The evidence comes from a field called paleoclimatology, the study of ancient climates. Scientists drill deep into the ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica, extracting ice cores. These cores are like tree rings for the Earth, capturing tiny bubbles of ancient atmosphere, layers of dust, and pollen that tell a story of the world that was. They tell us of wild temperature swings. More compellingly, from the bottom of the Arctic Ocean, cores of sediment have been pulled up. And within that mud, recovered from ridges deep under the permanent ice pack, scientists have found something that should not be there. The fossilized pollen of pine, alder, oak, and even the delicate remains of freshwater ferns. These are not the plants of a tundra. These are the plants of a temperate forest. This material is not thousands, but millions of years old, from a period called the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, a time of profound global warming. But the story gets closer to our own time. During the Pleistocene epoch, the time of the great ice ages, the climate seesawed violently. There were intervals, known as interglacials, when the ice retreated dramatically. The last major interglacial, about 125,000 years ago, was actually warmer than today. Sea levels were higher, and temperatures in the Arctic regions were several degrees Celsius warmer. Deciduous forests grew where there is now only permafrost. Animals like hippopotam wallowed in rivers in what is now London. In the high Arctic, on islands like Ellesmere and Greenland, the fossil record shows lush landscapes of birch and pine, inhabited by camels, giant beavers, and warm weather mammals. This is the geological reality. The top of the world has known periods of profound habitability within the recent geological past, a blink of an eye in Earth's deep time. Furthermore, the configuration of the continents and oceans was different. Some theories in Earth science, like the polar shift hypothesis, though controversial and not mainstream, speculate about more radical changes in the planet's alignment. Even without such dramatic shifts, the simple wobble of the Earth's axis, known as precession, changes the way sunlight strikes the polar regions over a 26,000-year cycle. A pole facing more directly towards the sun during its long summer could experience a dramatically milder climate. So the foundation for the legend exists in the very rock and ice. The idea of a warm, green, fertile land at the North Pole is not a poetic fantasy. It is a planetary memory. The Earth itself confirms that the stage was at various times set. The conditions for a Hyperborea have existed. The forests were real. The mild climate was real. The midnight sun was real. The only element missing from the scientific record is the civilization itself. But if a culture did arise in such an isolated, blessed environment during a warm interglacial period, what would happen when the climate changed again? When the great cold descended, as it always does in the cyclical rhythm of the ice ages, the ice does not just preserve pollen, it can also preserve everything else. The geological fact of a green Arctic transforms Hyperborea from an impossible myth into a haunting historical possibility. It means the stories of a lost paradise could be echoing a real, physical reality. A reality that was swallowed not by the sea, but by the relentless, creeping ice. The 19th and 20th centuries saw the frozen myth of Hyperborea thaw and flow into new, powerful, and sometimes dangerous currents. As the last blank spaces on the globe were filled in by explorers like Peary and Amundsen, who confirmed the North Pole was a trackless plain of ice atop a deep, cold ocean, the literal paradise seemed discredited. Yet the idea refused to die. Instead, it transformed. It moved from geography into the realms of the occult, the political, and the fringe archaeological. This chapter is the story of the seekers, those who looked for Hyperborea not with ice cores, but with symbols, swastikas, and a belief in a primordial super race. The most disturbing chapter in this search begins in late 19th century Europe with the rise of Ariosophy, a blend of racist ideology and occultism. Thinkers like Guido von List and later, the infamous Thule Society in Germany, took the old Nordic myths and welded them to a twisted, pseudo-scientific doctrine. They proclaimed that the Aryan race, a pure, superior, blonde, blue-eyed people, did not evolve in the jungles or plains, but originated in the ultimate north, in the lost homeland of Hyperborea, which they often called Thule. This Hyperborea, they claimed, was not just a civilization, but the cradle of all high culture and spiritual power. Its people were god-like, possessing advanced knowledge and psychic abilities. A great cataclysm and ice age forced them to migrate south, where they founded all the great ancient civilizations, Sumer, Egypt, India, but their blood and wisdom became diluted with inferior races. This myth of a polar origin became a cornerstone of Nazi ideology. Heinrich Himmler's SS organization, the Ahnenerbe, Ancestral Heritage, was dedicated to finding archaeological proof of this Aryan Hyperborean past. They mounted expeditions to Tibet, seeking the descendants of the white Hyperborean masters they believed ruled from the Himalayas. They scoured caves in France and islands in the Baltic for relics. Their quest was a dark parody of the original mystery, poisoning the well of inquiry with racism and madness, and forever linking the name Hyperborea and Thule with the horrors of the Third Reich. But the search was not confined to the occultists and the Nazis. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a wave of serious, if unconventional, scholars began to re-examine world mythology with a new eye. They were the diffusionists, who argued against the mainstream idea that civilizations sprang up independently. They believed in a single common source. One of the most prominent was the British scholar William F. Warren. In his 1885 book, Paradise found, the cradle of the human race at the North Pole. He used comparative mythology, astronomy, and geology to argue that the original Eden, the birthplace of all humanity and its first great culture, was at the North Pole. He meticulously collected creation stories from around the world that spoke of a primeval homeland where the sun never set, where a great world mountain stood, and from which ancestors migrated in all directions after a fall from grace or a climatic disaster. He saw the Arctic not as it is, but as it was during a warmer age, a Miocene Eden. His work was largely dismissed by the scientific establishment, but found a wide public audience. Another key figure was the Indian nationalist and mystic Bal Gangadhar Tilak. In his book, The Arctic Home in the Vedas, published in 1903, he presented a revolutionary argument. Through a painstaking analysis of the oldest Hindu scriptures, the Rig Veda, he pointed to descriptions that made no sense in the geography of India. He found hymns describing dawns that lasted for 30 days, and a constellation of stars that circled the sky without ever setting, phenomena only observable within the Arctic Circle. Tilak concluded that the ancestors of the Vedic people must have lived near the North Pole before the last ice age, preserving memories of that landscape in their most sacred texts for thousands of years. These seekers, from the dangerous ideologues to the earnest academics, all felt the same powerful pull of the myth. They were all trying to answer the same global chorus of northern origin stories. Their methods and conclusions varied wildly, but they shared a core belief. The scattered fragments of our oldest stories were not random. They were the broken pieces of a single, magnificent, and very real vase that had shattered long ago at the top of the world. If a civilization did rise and fall in the ancient Arctic, what traces would it leave? Stone does not rot, and ice is the greatest preserver on Earth. The search for physical evidence of Hyperborea leads us away from dusty tomes and into the realm of modern technology, scanning the deep places where human eyes cannot see. The hypothesis is simple. If the cataclysm was a sudden and severe glaciation, the structures of such a culture would not have been toppled by invaders or eroded by wind. They would have been entombed, frozen in a moment of time, like a mammoth caught in a glacier. The vast ice sheets of Greenland and the Arctic archipelago become not just barriers, but potential museums, their floors acting as silent libraries of a lost age. In recent decades, remote sensing technology has begun to read this library. Ice-penetrating radar mounted on aircraft and satellites sends pulses of energy down through thousands of feet of ice, mapping the contours of the bedrock below. These surveys, like NASA's Operation Ice Bridge, have one primary goal: to understand ice sheet dynamics and climate change. But in the process, they have revealed a hidden topography that sparks the imagination. The data has shown landscapes not of smooth, worn rock, but of deep, fjord-like valleys and dramatic mountain ranges buried entirely under the ice. Most compelling are the hints of something more. In the early 1970s, a team using ice-penetrating radar over Antarctica, the other frozen pole, detected unusual geometric readings under the ice of the Wilkes Land region. They described a massive, dense, symmetrical object buried under 2 miles of ice, hundreds of miles across. Dubbed the Wilkes Land anomaly, It is most likely a gigantic asteroid impact crater from the distant past. But it demonstrates the principle. Technology can find strange, structured things in the deep ice. In the Arctic, similar anomalies whisper. There are tales among Arctic explorers and pilots from the days before satellite mapping of seeing strange, pyramidal shapes under the clear ice of the far northern islands, or of glimpsing what looked like the outlines of vast, buried foundations on nunataks, the peaks of mountains piercing the ice sheets. These are anecdotal, often dismissed as pareidolia, the human tendency to see familiar shapes in random patterns. But the scientific data adds curious details. Radar scans of the Greenland ice sheet have revealed huge subglacial lakes and rivers of liquid water, a dynamic, hidden world. They have also mapped what geologists call rectilinear features, lines and angles in the bedrock that appear unnaturally straight. Geologists are quick to explain these as the result of tectonic forces, the natural fracturing of bedrock along fault lines, and they are almost certainly correct. Yet, to a mind primed by the Hyperborean myth, these straight lines on a map of a buried world can feel like a tantalizing clue. The most famous modern story comes from a 2016 paper that analyzed satellite gravity data over the Arctic Ocean. It suggested the possibility of a massive, submerged impact crater, hundreds of miles wide on the seafloor north of Alaska. Some immediately wondered, could this be the cataclysm, the great strike that tipped the climate and brought the ice? Whether any of these radar ghosts or gravity shadows are artifacts of a lost civilization is profoundly doubtful to science. But they serve a crucial purpose in the story. They make the unknown concrete. They transform the ice from a simple barrier into a tantalizing veil. We now possess the tools to lift that veil, to see the shape of the land that was green when mammoths walked there. Every scan, every core sample that brings up ancient forest soil confirms the stage existed. The silent library beneath the ice holds its books tightly. We have learned how to find the shelves. We are still learning how to open the volumes. And in that pause between the detection of a shape and its explanation, the ghost of Hyperborea breathes again. The evidence for Hyperborea does not rest solely on what might be hidden under the ice. A different kind of clue exists in plain sight, scattered across the globe in the form of immense stones. This path leads us to the world's most enduring ancient mystery, the purpose and origin of megalithic structures. From the sprawling alignments of Karnak in France to the towering dolmens of the Caucasus, from the mysterious stone circles of Britain to the massive polygonal walls of Peru, humanity's prehistoric past is marked by a puzzling obsession with moving and erecting colossal rocks. Mainstream archaeology dates these structures to the Neolithic and Bronze Ages, attributing them to local cultures for ceremonial or astronomical purposes. But a persistent thread in alternative thought asks a more radical question. What if these are not independent inventions, but the scattered fragments of a much older global blueprint? And what if that blueprint originated in the north? Proponents of this view point to a fascinating pattern, both in the geometry of the structures and in the myths attached to them. Many ancient megalithic sites exhibit sophisticated astronomical alignments, often pinpointing the solstices and equinoxes with remarkable precision. But some researchers, like the historian and linguist John Mitchell, argued for a sacred geometry that connected these sites across vast distances, forming a global grid of energy or meaning, with its primary axis aligned to the North Pole. This idea suggests the builders possessed an advanced understanding of geodesy, the science of measuring the Earth, knowledge supposedly impossible for so-called primitive peoples. Even more compelling are the stories the builders themselves or their descendants told about these places. Across cultures, megaliths are frequently described as the work of giants or of a god-like race from a forgotten time. The Irish called their megalithic tombs the beds of the Diarmuid and Grain, attributing them to mythical heroes. The Norse sagas spoke of Jotnar, giants, building great stone works in the dawn of time. In the Andes, the Inca claimed the Cyclopean walls of Sacsayhuaman were built not by them, but by a race of giants before the Great Flood. This global motif of giants from the north building with immense stone eerily mirrors the Greek description of the Hyperboreans as a race of towering stature. Furthermore, many creation myths speak of the first ancestors coming from the north and bringing with them the knowledge of stone. The connection deepens with the distribution of the most iconic megalith, the stone circle or cromlech. These circles are found from the Arctic Circle itself, in places like the Norwegian islands, all the way to the plains of Africa. But their densest concentration is in Western Europe, along the Atlantic fringe. If you were to draw lines from these major megalithic centers, from Stonehenge, from the Karnak alignments, and extend them northward, they converge in the general region of the North Sea and the Scandinavian peninsula, pointing like ancient arrows toward a lost origin. The Hyperborean hypothesis weaves these threads together, a sophisticated, possibly giant, civilization from the warm Arctic, possessing profound astronomical and geometric knowledge. When their homeland froze, they migrated south along the coastlines and river valleys, carrying their knowledge with them. They became the sea peoples, the culture bearers, the giants of legend. Where they settled, they built according to their sacred northern blueprint, using the only permanent material they knew: stone. Their purpose may have been to recreate the celestial order of their lost polar home, to build time machines of stone that tracked the sun they once lived with for 6 continuous months, or to mark the new lands as theirs under the old, sacred rules. This theory is, of course, highly speculative and rejected by mainstream academia, which sees clear evidence of local, gradual development in megalithic cultures. But the sheer scale of the stones, the repetition of the giant builder myth, and the haunting geometric precision keep the idea alive. The megaliths stand as silent, stubborn sentinels. They do not speak, but their alignment to the sun, their mass, and the legends that cling to them whisper a tantalizing possibility: that they are not the beginnings of human civilization, but the memorials of its first and greatest end. Cutting across the stones and the stories is a silent language of symbols, and one in particular traces a mysterious path from the polar ice to the temples of the world, the swastika. Its journey is perhaps the most potent and polluted symbol of the Hyperborean idea. Long before its horrific appropriation in the 20th century, the swastika was a near universal emblem of blessing, the sun, and cosmic rotation. It appears on ancient pottery in Ukraine dating back 12,000 years. It is etched into temple stones in ancient India, woven into Navajo textiles in North America, and cast into bronze mirrors in China. In the Norse world, it was the symbol of Thor's hammer, a mark of protection and power. This widespread distribution has long puzzled scholars. How did the same specific, complex symbol appear in cultures separated by oceans and millennia? Mainstream anthropology suggests independent invention, that the swastika is a simple, appealing geometric pattern that naturally occurs to humans designing decorative art. But to the diffusionists, those who believe in a single source for civilization, the swastika was a key piece of evidence. They saw it as the literal footprint of a migrating culture, carried from its point of origin to the ends of the earth. This is where the Arctic connection returns with force. Among the indigenous peoples of the Arctic and subarctic, the Sami of Scandinavia, the Ainu of Japan, and various Siberian tribes, the swastika was a sacred symbol representing the sun, the four directions, and the cyclical nature of life and the seasons. In these northern cultures, it was often linked to the sky wheel or the sun wheel, a direct depiction of a celestial body that in the high Arctic performs a dramatic circular dance in the summer sky, never setting but wheeling around the horizon. A people living at the pole would see the sun not as rising and setting, but as rotating around them in a great, endless circle. What better symbol to represent that unique experience than a rotating cross? The swastika in this light is not just a sun symbol, it is a polar sun symbol. The theory proposes that as Hyperborean migrants traveled south, they carried this sacred glyph with them. In India, it became associated with the sun god Surya and with auspiciousness. In ancient Greece, it appeared on pottery and was called the Gammadian. In Celtic lands, it was woven into intricate knotwork. Its meaning adapted to local beliefs, but its core connection to solar motion and cosmic order remained. This symbol's journey mirrors the supposed migration of the people themselves, from a singular point at the top of the world radiating outwards in all directions, leaving their signature in sacred art. The swastika's story takes a dark turn with the theorists of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, like the Theosophists and later the Ariosophists. Helena Blavatsky, founder of Theosophy, wrote of a series of root races that had evolved on Earth, the first of which was the Polarian race from Hyperborea. She adopted the swastika as a symbol of this primordial spiritual humanity. This occult adoption was then seized upon by Guido von List and the Thule Society, who explicitly linked the swastika to the Aryan Hyperboreans. They saw it as the ultimate racial and spiritual logo of the lost master race. It was this twisted, esoteric lineage that directly influenced Adolf Hitler's adoption of the hooked cross for the Nazi flag. He saw it as a symbol of the struggle for the victory of the Aryan man. Thus, a symbol that may have begun as a Neolithic observation of a polar sunrise became, through a chain of occult speculation and racist ideology, the emblem of history's most murderous regime. This tragic corruption forever altered our ability to see the swastika clearly. But its ancient, pre-Nazi prevalence remains a quiet, persistent mystery. It stands as a cryptographic clue, a repeating signature in the margins of humanity's oldest artworks, always spinning, always pointing to the four directions. And if you follow those directions backwards, if you trace the lines of its arms as they spiral inward, they seem to lead the eye relentlessly to a center, to a point of origin, to a pole around which everything once turned. In the year 1867, a Dutchman named Cornelis over de Linden presented a curious manuscript to a local librarian. It was a book unlike any other, written on a thick homemade paper made from flax, bound in oak boards and filled with a strange, runic-like script. He claimed it had been passed down through his family for generations. This was the Oera book, or Codex. Translated and published in the 1870s, it ignited a firestorm of controversy that burns in obscure corners of historical debate to this day. The manuscript claimed to be a history of the Frisian people, a Germanic ethnic group, compiled from writings dating back over 4,000 years. Its story was explosive. It told of a mighty, matriarchal civilization of seafarers and scholars called the Finda, the Lidda, and the Freya, the latter being the ancestors of the Frisians. They lived on a land called Itland, and Itland, the book stated clearly, was located in the North Sea, but it was not a small island. It was a vast continent that sank in a terrible cataclysm around 2193 BC. The description was not of a flood, but of a land submerging, of great earthquakes and fires from the earth, after which the stars themselves wandered from their courses. The survivors, the Freya, fled to the higher grounds of Europe, bringing their wisdom, their law, and their writing with them, becoming the civilizing force among the barbarian tribes. To believers, the Oera book was not just a history of Frisians. It was a first-hand account of the destruction of Atlantis, or rather, a northern Atlantis, a Hyperborea. It placed the lost advanced civilization not in the warm Atlantic, but in the cold, northern waters between Britain and Denmark, a land that later catastrophically sank. The academic world reacted with immediate and almost universal scorn. Linguists declared the language a clumsy, modern forgery, a pastiche of Old Frisian and other Germanic tongues. Historians pointed out anachronisms. The manuscript's convenient discovery in the 19th century, a time of rising European nationalism and fascination with lost continents, made it deeply suspect. It was branded a hoax, a clever and patriotic fabrication. Yet the Oera book refused to disappear. For proponents of alternative history, it held a series of tantalizing and oddly specific details that gave them pause. It described a society governed by folk mothers, a theocratic matriarchy centered around priestesses who maintained sacred, eternal flames in circular citadels called burgs. It contained precise astronomical observations and a sophisticated calendar. It spoke of distant voyages and colonies. Most intriguingly, it offered a moral and historical worldview completely at odds with the biblical or classical narratives dominant at the time. It presented a pagan, northern-centric origin for European civilization. The manuscript's fate was sealed when it was embraced and championed by Nazi ideologues of the Ahnenerbe, who saw in its tale of a blonde, seafaring master race from the north a perfect precursor to their own myths. This association, like that of the swastika, poisoned its well in the eyes of respectable scholarship. Yet the questions it raises linger like a ghost. If it is a forgery, it is an immensely creative and complex one, weaving together folklore, astronomy, and a unique philosophy. If it contains even a kernel of genuine tradition, a folk memory of a real land that sank in the North Sea, like the legendary Doggerland, but on a more dramatic scale, then it represents a seismic crack in our understanding of prehistory. The Oura Linda Codex sits at a dangerous crossroads. It is a document that speaks of a lost northern world with shocking clarity, but its voice arrives through a fog of fraud, nationalism, and evil. To listen to it is to risk being led into a labyrinth of deception. To ignore it completely is to potentially silence a lone, scratchy recording from a world that drowned. It remains the most controversial and detailed documentary evidence ever presented for a Hyperborean-type civilization, a testament not to its truth, but to the overwhelming power of the idea it seeks to prove. While the Oura Linda Codex speaks of a sunken continent, science has indeed confirmed a lost world in the very region it describes. Not a continent, but a vast, habitable landscape now lying beneath the waves of the North Sea. This is Doggerland, and its discovery provides a tangible archaeological anchor for the kind of cataclysm that could seed global myths of a drowned paradise. Until about 12,000 years ago, as the last ice age waned and sea levels were much lower, Britain was not an island. It was connected to mainland Europe by a sprawling, low-lying territory of hills, rivers, lagoons, and dense forests, teeming with life. This was Doggerland, a landmass as large as modern-day England, stretching from the east coast of Britain to the coasts of Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands. It was inhabited by Mesolithic hunter-gatherers who followed herds of reindeer and aurochs, fished in its rich rivers, and lived in a landscape that was, for its time, a fertile and relatively mild refuge after the long winter of the Ice Age. For thousands of years, human communities thrived there. Then the world warmed. Glaciers melted, and the seas began to rise, slowly but relentlessly swallowing the lowlands. Doggerland shrank, becoming a shrinking archipelago of islands. Then, around 6150 BC, the final dramatic blow fell. Geological evidence points to a catastrophic event, a massive submarine landslide off the coast of Norway, known as the Storegga Slide. This collapse triggered a devastating tsunami that roared across the remaining Doggerland Islands with walls of water perhaps over 15 meters high. What was left of that inhabited world was utterly scoured and submerged. The waves would have reached the hills that are now the coasts of Scotland and eastern England. For the people living there, it was an apocalypse. The discovery of Doggerland, primarily through seismic mapping and core samples taken by oil companies and research vessels, and the occasional trawler net hauling up ancient animal bones and finely crafted Mesolithic tools from the seafloor, is one of the great archaeological stories of our time. It proves that a populated, familiar world can vanish beneath the sea within human memory. It provides a perfect, real-world template for the Atlantis and Hyperborea myths, a prosperous land, home to ancestors, lost to a sudden, violent inundation. The survivors of Doggerland's final destruction would have fled to the higher grounds that became Britain and the European coast. They would have carried with them the traumatic memory of a green land that disappeared under the salt water in a single day of terror. That story, told and retold over hundreds of generations, could easily evolve into the legend of a greater, more glorious homeland lost in the distant past. Doggerland is not Hyperborea. It was a post-glacial landscape, not a polar continent, and its inhabitants were Stone Age hunter-gatherers, not a race of advanced giants. But the pattern is identical. It demonstrates how a real geological and human disaster can birth an immortal myth. Now imagine that same pattern applied to an even older, even more isolated land, perhaps one farther north that existed during a previous warm period. If a Doggerland-scale catastrophe, or the slower, relentless creep of ice, could erase a land at the edge of the North Sea from memory, leaving only ghostly echoes in folklore, what could it do to a land that existed at the very top of the world, in the complete isolation of the Arctic? Doggerland is the key that unlocks the plausibility of Hyperborea. It shows that the myth's core mechanics, a habitable northern land lost to water and time, are not fantasy. They are geology. They are archaeology. They are human history. The bones of mammoths and the flint tools dredged from the Brown Bank Ridge are the physical proof that stories of sunken lands are not mere allegories. They are memories. And if we have one confirmed memory of a lost northern world, is it so strange to suspect there might be another, older and deeper, frozen not in mud but in ice? High above the lost continents and sunken plains, piercing the very dome of the sky in humanity's oldest stories, stands a singular unifying image: the World Mountain. It is known by many names: Mount Meru in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, the Hyperboreans in Zoroastrian belief, the Asgard of the Norse, the Kunlun Mountain of Chinese myth. It is the axis around which the universe turns, the pillar holding up the heavens, the meeting point of the earthly and the divine. And in an astonishing number of these traditions, this cosmic mountain is explicitly placed in the far north. This is no minor detail. It is the spiritual and symbolic heart of the Hyperborean mystery. In the ancient Vedic texts, Mount Meru stands at the center of the world, surrounded by concentric rings of continents and oceans. The sun, moon, and stars revolve around it. It is the home of the gods and the perfected beings, and its location is described as being in the north, on the northern side of the Himalayas. The ancient Persians envisioned a global mountain range from which all waters flowed, with a central peak, the Hyperboreans, at the northern axis of the world. The Greeks had Mount Olympus, but they also spoke of the Hyperboreans living in the shadow of the Riparian Mountains, the mountains from which the north wind blew, often depicted as the northern edge of the world. This concept is not confined to Eurasia. Among the indigenous peoples of Siberia, the World Mountain is a sacred center, a place of origin and shamanic ascent. The Sami spoke of the passive air, or holy mountain. The concept is so universal that it points to a fundamental human understanding, a shared archetype. But what could have planted this specific idea of a central, axial mountain in the north? One compelling possibility lies in a unique geophysical observation. If a civilization did exist in a warm Arctic basin, their view of the heavens would have been utterly unique. At the exact North Pole, the celestial pole, the point in the sky around which all stars appear to rotate, would be directly overhead at the zenith. There is no star there now, but the void point itself would be the unmoving pivot of the entire cosmos. Below this celestial pivot on the Earth, a prominent lone mountain would naturally be seen as the terrestrial anchor of this cosmic rotation, the literal axis of the world, connecting Earth to the still point in the turning sky. The mountain would not just be tall, it would be sacred beyond measure, the very linchpin of reality. If that civilization later migrated south, they would carry this cosmological map with them. But in their new homes, the celestial pole would no longer be overhead. It would be low on the northern horizon. The stars would now rotate around a point in the north, not above. So their descendants would continue to revere the north as the direction of the axis, and they would project their memory of the world mountain onto that northern horizon or onto local mountains that seem to touch that sacred direction. The archetype would remain, but its physical location would become mythic, a memory of a geography that no longer matched their new reality. This is precisely what we see in the ancient texts, a revered northern axis anchored by a mountain that cannot be found on any earthly map. The same pattern appears with the world tree, the Yggdrasil of the Norse, the oak of the Vedas, the tree of life found in countless traditions. It too is an axis, its roots in the underworld, its branches holding up the heavens. And it too is often placed in the north. These are not random symbols. They are a sophisticated celestial cosmology, a memory of a sky observed from the top of the world. The persistent global myth of the northern axis mundi is perhaps the most profound and elegant clue for Hyperborea. It suggests that the origin of this universal symbol was not a shared human psychology alone, but a shared experience, a common point of observation, from a vantage point that has been lost to us for millennia. It is the memory of a sky that once turned around a point directly overhead, and of the earth reaching up from that sacred spot to touch it. Closely entwined with the myth of the world mountain is the story of a stolen treasure, a gift from the gods that lifted humanity from savagery. Across cultures, the secret of fire, and with it knowledge, technology, and civilization itself, is said to have come from a benefactor who defied the divine order to bring it to mankind. The most famous is the Greek titan Prometheus, who stole fire from the chariot of the sun god Helios, or from the forge of Hephaestus, and gave it to humanity, hiding it in a hollow fennel stalk. For this crime, he was chained to a mountain in the Caucasus, far to the north and east of Greece, where an eagle eternally devoured his liver. But the Greeks were not alone. In the Vedic tradition, a similar figure emerges, Matarisvan, a divine being who fetches the hidden fire from the heavens and brings it to the Brig priests, the first humans. This fire is called Agni, and it is not just physical flame, but the light of knowledge and ritual. In Norse myth, the trickster god Loki is a more ambiguous figure, but he is instrumental in securing treasures for the gods, and fire is an element he constantly plays with and controls. In the Americas, figures like the coyote or raven steal fire from selfish beings who hoard it. The pattern is unmistakable. Civilization begins with a theft of divine knowledge from the sky, and the thief is punished in a remote, often northern location. The Hyperborean lens brings a startling focus to this global story. If we consider Hyperborea as the original, advanced northern civilization, the myth of Prometheus transforms from a metaphor into a potential historical allegory. Prometheus, whose name means forethinker, could represent the Hyperborean culture bearers themselves. The fire he steals is not merely flame, but the totality of their knowledge: astronomy, agriculture, metalworking, writing, sacred geometry, the full package of a Neolithic revolution. He hides it in a fennel stalk, a natural, humble container which could symbolize the simpler hunter-gatherer societies of the South who received this knowledge and could only absorb it in a basic form. And where is Prometheus punished? Chained to a mountain in the Caucasus. This is precisely one of the major migration routes proposed for Hyperborean survivors coming south from a freezing Arctic, through the steppes of Russia to the mountain passes of the Caucasus. The eternal eagle, the relentless cold of the Ice Age, the suffering of a people watching their gift take root in new lands while their own world died. The allegory fits with a haunting resonance. Furthermore, the Greeks placed the homeland of the gods and the source of divine gifts in the far north. Apollo, the god of light, reason, and the arts, the very essence of civilized knowledge, spent his winters among the Hyperboreans. The connection is explicit. Advanced knowledge comes from the north. The Prometheus myth, then, could be a southern memory of contact with these advanced northern migrants. The theft represents the irreversible transfer of technology. The punishment encapsulates the trauma and hardship of the northerners' own exodus and decline. This interpretation weaves the mythological into the hypothetical historical. It suggests that our oldest stories about the origins of culture are not just fables about the human condition, but encrypted accounts of a pivotal meeting between two different worlds: the sophisticated, doomed survivors of a polar homeland and the simpler peoples of the South. The gift of fire was real. It was the spark that ignited civilizations across Europe and Asia. And the stories insist that spark came from a cold, distant, punished place at the top of the world. There exists a tangible, beautiful substance that physically ties the ancient Mediterranean world to the mysterious north: amber. To the Greeks and Romans, this golden, translucent resin that could hold the light of the sun within it and generate static electricity when rubbed was a substance of magic and wonder. They called it electron, the root of our word electricity. And they knew with certainty that it came from the north. Ancient historians like Pythias and later Pliny the Elder wrote of a northern people called the Aestii who gathered amber from the shores of a sea they called the Amber Sea, which we know as the Baltic. This amber, fossilized tree resin from forests that were millions of years old, was traded along vast, winding routes that stretched from the Baltic coast all the way to Egypt and Mesopotamia. These were the Amber Roads, a northern counterpart to the Silk Road, operating for millennia. The journey of this sunstone is a hard archaeological fact that proves a deep, sustained connection between the advanced civilizations of the South and the resource-rich, myth-shrouded North long before recorded history. But within this trade network lies a deeper mystery. The Greeks told strange stories about amber's origin. It was said to be the tears of the Heliades, the sisters of Phaethon, who wept amber when their brother crashed the sun chariot and fell into the northern river Eridanus, a mythical river often placed in the far north. This links amber directly to the sun and to a northern catastrophe. More practically, The trade implies not just random collection, but organized commerce. Who were the people at the northern end of this chain? Were they simply hunter-gatherers picking up pretty stones on the beach? Or was there a more complex intermediary society facilitating this valuable long-distance trade? The sheer volume of amber found in Mycenaean shaft graves and Egyptian tombs suggests a steady, managed supply. The Hyperborean theory inserts itself here. If a sophisticated culture existed in the circum-Arctic region during a warm period, they would have been the natural masters and initiators of such a trade. Amber, a substance that captures and holds light, would have held profound symbolic value for a people who lived under the midnight sun for half the year. It was, literally, frozen sunlight, a piece of their eternal summer made portable. As their climate deteriorated, trade would have become a critical means of survival, exchanging this sacred stone for grain, metals, and other goods from the south. The amber roads, then, would not be paths opened by southern explorers, but the established trade routes of a northern civilization in decline, routes that later persisted long after the original masters were gone or transformed. The geographical focus of the oldest amber finds is telling. The most prized amber and the largest deposits are on the shores of the Baltic, but also in regions like Jutland and the coast of the North Sea, the very areas that would have been the southern frontiers of a receding Arctic civilization, and later, the lands of the mythical Hyperborean gift-givers. The flow of amber is a silent, golden testimony that the North was not an empty barbarian void. It was a known, connected, and valuable part of the ancient world's economy. And what flows along trade routes does more than move goods. It moves ideas, stories, and myths. Each piece of amber that reached a temple in Greece or a palace in Crete carried with it an invisible cargo. The legend of the distant, sun-blessed land where golden tears wept from the trees. The story of Hyperborea is ultimately a story of endings. It speaks to a deep, primal human understanding that worlds are not permanent, that golden ages turn to ice and ash, and that the sky itself can fall. This fear is not paranoia. It is a memory written in the bones of the planet. The myth of a lost polar paradise sits within a larger, terrifying pattern of cyclical catastrophe that permeates ancient mythologies worldwide. The Greeks spoke of successive ages of man, gold, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron, each ending in a devastating cleansing. The Hindus and Buddhists teach of vast cosmic cycles, yugas and kalpas, where worlds are created, destroyed, and reborn. The Norse had Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, a winter of winters followed by fire and flood, after which a new green world emerges. The Aztecs believed in 5 suns, each representing an era destroyed by a different elemental force. These are not just stories, they are cultural trauma responses to real events. Modern geology confirms that cataclysm is the norm. Ice ages come and go with rhythmic, astronomical precision, governed by the slow wobble and tilt of the Earth. Supervolcanoes have darkened the sky for years. And most terrifying of all, the Earth exists in a cosmic shooting gallery. Impact craters litter our planet, from the vast, ancient scar in South Africa to the relatively recent Barringer crater in Arizona. The Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event that wiped out the dinosaurs was caused by an asteroid. The Younger Dryas period, around 12,800 years ago, saw a sudden, violent return to glacial conditions that coincided with the extinction of megafauna like the mammoth and the saber-toothed cat. A controversial but persistent theory suggests this was triggered by a fragmented comet impact over the North American ice sheet, an impact that would have generated firestorms and floods of unimaginable scale. If a civilization like Hyperborea existed during a warm interglacial period, its end would not have been a slow fade. It would have been an apocalypse. The creeping ice is one scenario, a slow-motion burial, but a sudden trigger is equally plausible. A large asteroid or comet fragment striking the Arctic ice cap would be a planet-altering event. It would flash melt billions of tons of ice, causing instantaneous global flooding, the deluge myths of every culture. It would throw vast amounts of dust and water vapor into the atmosphere, plunging the world into a nuclear winter and triggering a rapid, severe glaciation, the Fimbulwinter of Norse prophecy that precedes Ragnarök. The geography of the impact at the pole would create unique, terrifying effects. The Greek poet Hesiod, describing the end of the Golden Age, wrote that the survivors were carried away by the gods to dwell at the ends of the earth, where they live without care, by the deep eddying ocean. This sounds like a memory of evacuation. The ancient Iranian text, the Bundahishan, describes the Aryan homeland made foul by the evil spirit who created a mighty evil, a creation of the demons, winter. The cataclysm is specifically a plunge into cold. The Hyperborean myth, when viewed through this lens, is humanity's archetypal memory of the last great reset. It represents the fragile peak of a cycle, the beautiful, advanced culture that always falls when the cosmic clock strikes midnight. The fear is not that it happened once, but that it will happen again. The pole in this view is not just a location. It is a bullseye. The stories of a land beyond the north wind are also stories of what comes with the north wind, annihilation. This transforms Hyperborea from a nostalgic dream into a warning. It is our planet's own ghost, reminding us that the climate is fragile, the sky is not always friendly, and that every civilization, no matter how golden, lives on borrowed time under a celestial sword of Damocles. The ice that may hide its ruins is the same ice that will one day, in the grand cycle of things, come for us all. As the physical exploration of the Arctic in the 19th and 20th centuries failed to reveal a sunken continent or golden cities, the location of Hyperborea underwent a radical, desperate shift. If it could not be found on the Earth, perhaps it existed inside it. The theory of a hollow Earth, with openings at the poles leading to an inner world warmed by a central sun, became a powerful receptacle for the Hyperborean myth. This idea is ancient in spirit, but found its modern voice with figures like the American eccentric John Cleves Symmes, who in 1818 published a circular declaring the Earth hollow and habitable within, with openings at both poles. He passionately lobbied Congress to fund an expedition to the North Pole to find the entrance. While Symmes was dismissed by mainstream science, his idea captivated the public and fused with esoteric thought. Theosophists like Helena Blavatsky adopted it, proposing that the Hyperboreans were not extinct but had retreated into this inner world, evolving into even more ethereal spiritual beings. The Nazis of the Thule Society and the Ahnenerbe were fascinated by this concept. Some believed that the true Aryans were not from a lost outer continent, but from the inner world of Agartha, a subterranean kingdom of super beings, whose capital, Shambhala, was a place of occult power. Expeditions were sent not only to Tibet, but also to the Arctic and Antarctic with the hope of finding the entrance. This hollow earth diversion is a crucial, if bizarre, chapter in the Hyperborean saga. It represents the myth's incredible flexibility and enduring power. When one possible reality, a physical external continent, was disproven by exploration, the story simply retreated inward into a space that could not be so easily disproven. The warm land beyond the ice motif translated perfectly into a warm land beneath the ice. The descriptions were similar: a paradise of perpetual light from the inner sun, a home for a master race, a source of ancient wisdom. The northern lights, or aurora borealis, were often cited by hollow earth proponents as the glowing reflection of the inner sun, leaking out through the polar opening. This theory provided an explanation for the strange warmth and open water reported by some Arctic explorers north of the ice pack, and for the migration of birds flying north in the winter. They were, it was claimed, heading to the interior world. The hollow earth is, in many ways, Hyperborea's shadow. It is the myth turned inside out, literally and figuratively. It shows how a compelling narrative, when faced with contradictory evidence, can mutate to survive, moving from the realm of potential archaeology to pure, untouchable fantasy. While scientifically absurd, seismology has mapped the Earth's solid inner structure. The hollow Earth theory kept the flame of the polar mystery alive in the popular imagination during an age of empirical discovery. It served as a psychic refuge for the dream, ensuring that when the next shift in understanding came, the core idea of a hidden, advanced world at the pole was ready to re-emerge in new forms. The journey to find Hyperborea had split into two paths, one seeking it in the deep past, buried under ice and time, the other seeking it in a parallel present, hidden in a geography of pure imagination. Both paths, however, started from the same point, a deep, unshakable belief that the top of the world holds a secret far greater than ice and rock. In the quiet laboratories of the 21st century, a new tool has emerged that can read the oldest book of all, the human genome. Genetics has revolutionized our understanding of human migration, revealing epic journeys written in the sequences of our DNA. As scientists map the family tree of humanity, tracing branches back through time using markers on the Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA, they have uncovered a story of a great human expansion from Africa, the filling of continents, and the mixing of populations. But could this deep history hold a faint, anomalous whisper of something older, something from a place off the map? The search for a Hyperborean genetic signature is a search for a ghost. Mainstream genetics finds no evidence for a lost, advanced civilization at the pole. The peopling of the Arctic, as shown by DNA, is a relatively recent story, with the ancestors of today's Inuit and related peoples arriving in the high Arctic only within the last few thousand years, admirably adapted to the cold, but not the remnants of a prior, warm weather utopia. However, the genetic picture is not without its own mysteries that tantalize alternative thinkers. One is the puzzling story of certain genetic lineages found in indigenous populations of Siberia and the Americas. Some haplogroups, like mitochondrial haplogroup X, present a distribution pattern that is difficult to explain with standard migration models. While most Native American DNA shows clear Siberian origins, haplogroup X appears in low frequencies in both some Native American populations and in populations around the Mediterranean and the Near East, but is largely absent in Siberia. This odd discontinuity has led to speculation about possible ancient transatlantic contacts, or more relevantly, about a northern circumpolar origin that could have seeded populations both east and west. More broadly, the entire narrative of human expansion is being questioned by some geneticists and archaeologists who point to anomalies in the timeline. The mainstream out of Africa model posits a major migration around 60,000 years ago. But there is evidence of modern humans in places like Australia and parts of Asia much earlier, suggesting multiple earlier dispersals, some of which may have gone extinct or been absorbed. Could one of these lost branches have found its way to a habitable Arctic refugium during a warm period and developed in isolation? Genetics also reveals the story of the ancient North Eurasians, a ghost population inferred from DNA analysis of ancient skeletons like the 24,000-year-old remains of the Malta boy in Siberia. This population contributed significantly to both Western Europeans and to the ancestors of Native Americans, showing a deep, ancient genetic connection across the high latitudes of Eurasia. While this is a far cry from a sophisticated civilization, it does paint a picture of a resilient, widespread northern people during the last ice age, surviving in refuges. For the Hyperborean idea, the genetic trail is the most elusive of all. It would require finding a distinct, unknown genetic signature in very ancient remains, one that shows no clear descent from known branches and suggests a long period of isolation, followed by a sudden diffusion. No such definitive signature has been found, yet the field of archaeogenetics is young. Every year, new ancient genomes are sequenced, rewriting chapters of our past. The possibility remains, however faint, that a skeleton pulled from the thawing permafrost of Siberia or Greenland, dating to a warm interglacial, could one day carry a genetic story with no clear ancestor, a story looking not south to Africa, but north to a center that no longer exists. Until then, our DNA tells a story of incredible adaptation and survival, but the specific ghost of Hyperborea, if it exists, remains a whisper in the static, a sequence not yet decoded, a potential chapter in the human story waiting to be read in the marrow of a bone yet to be found. Today, the Arctic is not a stable, frozen tomb. It is melting at a rate that alarms scientists and transforms the very geography of the mystery. The ice that has preserved the potential evidence for millennia is now, for the first time, pulling back its veil. This unprecedented thaw is a double-edged sword, an ecological catastrophe, but also an unexpected and urgent opportunity for discovery. As permafrost softens and glaciers retreat, they are yielding up treasures locked away for thousands of years. This is not speculation, it is already happening. In Siberia, mammoth tusks and entire carcasses, flesh and fur intact, are emerging from the mud. In the Canadian and Scandinavian Arctic, ancient tools, clothing, and even settlements are being revealed as the ground thaws. These are the possessions of the known, recent ancestors of modern Arctic peoples. But the thaw goes deeper, exposing landscapes that have not seen the sun for over 100,000 years. This rapid change has launched a quiet, frantic race, a race between archaeologists who seek to document and preserve these fragile emerging clues before they rot or are looted, and the relentless forces of decay and commercial exploitation. For the Hyperborean hypothesis, this thaw is the most dramatic development in centuries. The silent library is finally opening its doors, but the pages are dissolving in the rain. If there were any structures, any artifacts of a pre-glacial culture in the high Arctic, their chance of discovery is now higher than it has been since the ice first encased them. The retreating ice sheets of Greenland and the mountain glaciers of the Arctic islands are exposing bedrock that has been scoured and hidden since the last interglacial period. Satellite imagery now regularly captures new lakes, new rock faces, and new patterns emerging from the white. Expeditions can now access areas that were sheer, treacherous ice walls just decades ago. The search, however, is a monumental challenge. The Arctic is vast, remote, and hostile. The emerging terrain is rugged and largely unexplored. Even if a squared stone or a metal artifact were to emerge, distinguishing it from a natural geological formation or a relic from a later known culture would require immense expertise and an open mind. Mainstream archaeology, focused on known human migration patterns, is not actively looking for a Hyperborean civilization. Any discovery would likely be accidental. A survey team mapping glacial retreat, a mineral prospector, a hiker in Svalbard stumbling upon something that does not belong. The thaw also brings a profound responsibility and a chilling ethical dimension. The same permafrost that preserves artifacts is also a vault for ancient bacteria, viruses, and a record of past atmospheres. It is a ticking clock. The race is not just to find evidence of a lost world, but to find it before the modern world, with its climate change and industrial hunger, erases it forever. The dream of Hyperborea is no longer a passive fantasy. It has entered an active, urgent phase. The ice is telling its secrets, not in a whisper, but in a torrent of meltwater. The question is no longer solely, did it exist? But can we find the proof before it vanishes for a second and final time? Beyond the ice cores, the genetics, and the melting permafrost, there lies the most powerful evidence for Hyperborea, its unshakable grip on the human imagination. This enduring appeal is the final, and perhaps most important, piece of the puzzle. It speaks to a need deeper than history, a psychological and spiritual void that the myth fills with the light of a forgotten sun. Why does this idea, against all odds and evidence, persist? First, Hyperborea represents the ultimate lost golden age, a theme embedded in the psyche of almost every culture. It is a time of purity, harmony, and direct connection to the divine from which we have fallen. This nostalgia for a better past is a powerful counterpoint to the struggles and imperfections of the present. In a world of conflict, pollution, and anxiety, a land of eternal peace and spring is a potent sanctuary for the mind. Second, It offers a tantalizing solution to the puzzle of human origins and the sudden, seemingly miraculous rise of advanced knowledge. The gaps in the archaeological record, the unexplained similarities between distant cultures, the sheer genius of ancient astronomical and architectural feats, these anomalies create a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the human mind. Hyperborea steps in as an elegant, if unproven, explanation, a single advanced source for the spark of civilization. Furthermore, Hyperborea touches on our relationship with nature and catastrophe. It is a story of a paradise lost not to war or moral decay, but to a natural disaster, a change in climate, a strike from the cosmos. This resonates deeply in our era of climate anxiety. It is a warning and a tragedy, reminding us of the fragility of even the most perfect society in the face of planetary forces. It makes our own civilization's fate feel part of a grand, cyclical drama. On a spiritual level, Hyperborea functions as a symbolic north within us all. In many traditions, north is the direction of wisdom, of the home of the gods, of the ultimate mystery. It is the point of the compass associated with stillness, with the axis, with the realm of the eternal and unchanging. To seek Hyperborea is metaphorically to seek that still point within ourselves, the core of peace and knowledge that feels primordial and untouched by the chaos of life. The myth also empowers the idea of the seeker, the outsider who knows a greater truth. Believing in a hidden history, a secret knowledge kept from the mainstream, is a compelling narrative. It turns the believer into a modern-day shaman, piecing together clues from disparate fields, seeing connections others miss. This is deeply satisfying. Finally, Hyperborea endures because it is, in essence, a beautiful story. It has all the elements of epic mythology: a wondrous realm, a god-like people, a catastrophic fall, a scattering of heroes, and a legacy hidden in plain sight. It is a story that can be endlessly explored, debated, and reimagined. It is a canvas for our hopes about who we once were, and our fears about what might become of us. The evidence for Hyperborea as a physical place may remain elusive, but the evidence for Hyperborea as a psychological and mythological reality is overwhelming. It is not just a potential civilization. It is a necessary dream, a North Star for the human spirit, guiding us through the long night of history, always pointing to the possibility that we were once, and therefore could once again be, something more. Today, the quest for Hyperborea is no longer confined to the pages of occult books or the funded expeditions of a racist regime. It has entered a new, digital, and democratized age, powered by the internet and fueled by a global community of independent researchers, satellite image enthusiasts, and alternative historians. These are the modern pilgrims, and they conduct their search not with ice axes, but with Google Earth coordinates, geological surveys, and a relentless cross-referencing of ancient texts with cutting-edge science. Their forums and websites hum with activity, analyzing every new discovery from the thawing north. They scrutinize the sonar scans of the Arctic seafloor for unnatural geometric shapes. They debate the significance of strange, pyramidal mountains on remote Arctic islands, like the one on Ellesmere Island that, from certain angles, appears startlingly symmetrical. They pore over the latest LiDAR scans of forests in Russia and Canada, looking for signs of buried structures. They are the ones who connect the dots between the discovery of a 40-million-year-old petrified forest on Axel Heiberg Island and the legends of a warm, forested polar realm. They are the audience for documentaries that explore the possibility of advanced prehistoric cultures, and they digest complex papers on paleoclimatology, looking for the window of time when the Arctic could have been habitable. These seekers are a diverse group. Some are driven by a spiritual conviction, seeing Hyperborea as the homeland of a pure ancestral wisdom we must reclaim. Others approach it as a grand historical puzzle, the ultimate cold case. They are often deeply knowledgeable, pulling from fields as varied as geology, mythology, archaeology, and astronomy. They champion anomalies that mainstream science overlooks or dismisses, like the alleged stone spheres of the Arctic or the curious, regular patterns of some subglacial features in Antarctica. They are the first to notice when a melting glacier in Norway reveals a perfectly preserved ancient arrow, and they wonder what else might lie beside it. Their methods are a blend of the rigorous and the speculative. They use legitimate scientific data, NASA topography maps, NOAA ocean floor surveys, geological core sample results as their primary texts, interpreting them through a different lens. This creates a fascinating dynamic. They are not rejecting science, but rather applying it to a question that established academia has deemed unworthy of pursuit. The internet has given them a collective voice, allowing a lone researcher in Finland to compare notes with a software engineer in California and a historian in India, weaving a global network of speculation. While their conclusions are often labeled as fringe, their existence is a testament to the power of the Hyperborean mystery. They are the living embodiment of the question mark that hangs over the North Pole. They ensure that every new scientific discovery about the Arctic's past is immediately examined for its mythic potential. In an age where every inch of the planet seems mapped and known, they keep alive the thrilling possibility that the greatest discovery of all is still out there, waiting in the silent, white vastness, slowly emerging from the ice of both the land and of forgotten time. They are not necessarily finding Hyperborea, but they are proving beyond doubt that the search for it is a permanent part of the human journey. The final, and perhaps most profound resting place of Hyperborea is not in the ice, but in the human heart and in the identity of nations. For some peoples living in the shadow of the Arctic, the myth has transcended speculation to become a part of their cultural fabric, a story that shapes how they see their land and their past. This is most vividly seen in modern Russia, where the idea of a northern homeland has taken on a powerful, almost tangible life. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, there has been a remarkable revival of interest in Hyperborean themes within certain Russian intellectual, mystical, and even political circles. Unlike the Western focus on a lost civilization, this Russian interpretation often views Hyperborea not as a sunken land, but as the spiritual and ancestral source of the Slavic people, and by extension, all of humanity. This modern Russian Hyperboreanism draws from a mix of 19th century theosophy, early 20th century mystic philosophers like Nikolai Roerich, and contemporary nationalist thought. Proponents scour ancient Slavic folklore, songs, and embroidery patterns for symbols they believe are Hyperborean in origin. like the ubiquitous Slavic goddess motifs or intricate solar signs. They point to the mysterious megaliths of the Kola Peninsula or the labyrinthine stone spirals on the shores of the White Sea as physical proof of an ancient, advanced northern culture. This is more than historical curiosity. It is a form of myth-making that builds national pride and a sense of destiny. It positions Russia not as a latecomer to civilization, but as the guardian of its primordial cradle. The harsh, vast landscape of the Russian north is reimagined not as a frozen wasteland, but as the sacred, if sleeping, remnant of the First World. Expeditions are mounted by enthusiasts and private institutes to these northern sites, seeking validation. Books and documentaries proliferate, weaving genetics, linguistics, and archaeology into a narrative of Slavic primordiality. This movement exists on a spectrum, from poetic cultural revivalism to more extreme, esoteric forms of nationalism that see in Hyperborea a mandate for racial or spiritual supremacy. It is a clear echo of the German Thule society, but transplanted onto Slavic soil and stripped, in its public face, of its most overtly Nazi associations. It speaks to a universal human need, to root one's identity in deep, glorious time, to feel a connection to a legacy that predates written history. When a people look out at the endless taiga and the frozen tundra, the idea that this was once the center of the world, a garden of the gods, transforms the landscape from one of hardship into one of sacred mystery. The myth becomes a source of strength and uniqueness. This phenomenon is not exclusive to Russia. In Scandinavia, the Viking Age is often romantically viewed as the energetic, if barbaric echo of a greater northern past. The Finnish national epic, the Kalevala, is filled with references to a primeval northern homeland called Pohjola, a land of both power and peril. The myth provides a deep-time backdrop for national character. In this way, Hyperborea ceases to be a lost civilization we are trying to find. It becomes a found story we are trying to live. It moves from archaeology to ideology, from science to soul. The land itself, from the Urals to the fjords, is read as the living, breathing relic of Hyperborea. Its survival is no longer a matter of unearthing stones, but of rekindling a spirit. This is the ultimate fate of many great myths. They stop being stories about the past and start being blueprints for the future. The search for the physical Hyperborea may forever remain inconclusive, but its rebirth as a cultural and national symbol is already a concrete, powerful, and unfolding reality. We have traversed the icy bridges of myth, the deep caverns of geology, the twisted pathways of occult history, and the digital networks of modern seekers. We have seen a land that is sometimes a mapmaker's dream, sometimes a geneticist's ghost, sometimes a nationalist's banner. After this immense journey, a final, clarifying question remains. What are we really looking for when we search for Hyperborea? The answer, perhaps, is not a single buried city. It is a mirror. Hyperborea is the mirror we hold up to our forgotten past, to our technological pride, to our spiritual longing, and to our profound fear of oblivion. In its polished, icy surface, we see different reflections at different turns of history. For the ancient Greeks, it reflected an idealized other, a society that lived as they believed humans were meant to live, in harmony with the gods and nature, free from the struggles that define their own brilliant, violent world. It was a philosophical tool, a way to critique their own society by showing a better one, even if that better one was imaginary. For the 19th and early 20th century occultists and racists, the mirror distorted into a tool of power. It reflected a twisted narcissism, a desire to prove one's own people were the descendants of God-like masters, granting a mythical justification for dominance and horror. In that reflection, Hyperborea became a weapon. For the modern, independent researcher scrolling satellite imagery, the mirror reflects a thrilling possibility that history is wrong, that the world still holds epic, paradigm-shattering secrets. This reflection is about the joy of the puzzle, the empowerment of the amateur, and a deep skepticism of institutional narratives. It is a reflection of curiosity and a touch of rebellious hope. For the climate scientist examining the pollen in an Arctic core sample, the mirror reflects a stark, sobering truth. It shows a planet of radical change, where climates can flip, forests can grow on polar islands, and ice can swallow continents. This Hyperborea is not a civilization, but a climate state, a proof of Earth's volatility, a warning from the deep past about our fragile present. And for the ordinary person who feels the tug of the story, the mirror reflects something simpler and more human, a longing for a time of peace, a place of pure beginnings, a lost home we feel in our bones even though we have never known it. It is the nostalgia for a home we never had. This is the core of the myth's power. It speaks to the universal feeling of exile, from childhood, from nature, from a state of grace. Hyperborea is that Edenic home, perpetually lost, perpetually remembered in stories. The search, therefore, is never truly for stones and bones. It is a search for meaning. We project onto that blank, white space at the top of the world our highest aspirations and our deepest fears. We fill the silence of the ice with the music of our own imaginations. The enduring quest for Hyperborea proves that humanity cannot abide a vacuum, especially not one of such vast, symbolic importance as the pole. We must place something there. A mountain, a city, a garden, a memory. In doing so, we are not mapping the Arctic. We are mapping the contours of the human soul. The truth of Hyperborea may lie forever buried or may never have existed at all. But the truth of why we believe in Hyperborea is all around us, in our art, our science, our nationalism, and our dreams. It is the story we tell ourselves about who we were before the fall and who we might yet become if we could only find our way back to that sunlit, forgotten north. We stand now at the culmination of our journey, looking out over a landscape of ideas as vast and fractured as the Arctic pack ice. We have gathered the fragments, the global myths of a northern cradle, the medieval maps insisting on a habitable pole, the geological proof of a green Arctic, the eerie alignment of ancient megaliths, the persistent symbols, the sunken plains of Doggerland, the cyclical tales of cataclysm, and the modern ache in the human spirit. Alone, each piece is a curiosity, an anomaly with a plausible, mainstream explanation. But together, assembled with the patient, obsessive care of one trying to reconstruct a shattered vase, they form a silhouette, the shadow of a possibility that is too coherent, too widespread, and too deeply felt to be dismissed as mere coincidence. This silhouette is Hyperborea. It is not a proven historical fact. It is a grand enigma, a question mark etched into the foundation of human memory. The synthesis does not yield a simple answer, but a profound and haunting pattern. Consider the pattern. Cultures worldwide with no contact preserve stories of an ancestral homeland in the far north, a place of primordial perfection and often of a great flood or ice. The earth itself confirms that the far north was, at times, habitable and green. Ancient structures and symbols show a preoccupation with celestial order and solar cycles that align with a polar perspective. Our oldest cosmological maps place the axis of the world, the pillar of heaven in the north. And layered over it all is the visceral human theme of a golden age lost to a devastating natural disaster. Science explains each strand separately. Convergent mythology explains the similar stories. Geology explains the warm periods. Independent innovation explains the symbols and megaliths. The human need for paradise explains the golden age. But the Hyperborean hypothesis asks, what if these explanations, while correct in their individual lanes, are missing the highway that connects them? What if they are all downstream effects of a single, forgotten upstream source? The pattern suggests a catalyst in the form of a real, though perhaps not technologically advanced in our modern sense, culture that developed in Arctic isolation during a warm period. A culture that developed a unique pole-centric understanding of astronomy, symbolized by the axis and the swastika. A culture that was eventually destroyed or displaced by a sudden return to glacial conditions, its people scattering along coastlines and river valleys, carrying their stories, their symbols, and their celestial knowledge with them. These survivors would have been the giants or gods of legend to the simpler peoples they met, the Promethean gift givers. Their reality over millennia would have been distilled into myth, their homeland elevated to paradise, their exodus remembered as a fall. This synthesis does not require flying machines or energy crystals. It requires only a successful, isolated human society with a deep understanding of its unique environment and a traumatic, unforgettable end. The enigma is not solved, but it comes into sharp focus. The unanswered question at the pole is no longer, was there a city here? It is, to what degree are our oldest cultural foundations, our creation myths, our cosmic models, our symbols of power and sanctity, the legacy of a real physical event centered on a place that is now a frozen desert? The ice has erased the evidence, but the echo is deafening. We are left not with a smoking gun, but with a resonant chamber of whispers, all harmonizing on the same eerie note. The search for Hyperborea, therefore, transforms from a hunt for a lost civilization into a deeper, more philosophical investigation. It is the study of how a planetary trauma might imprint itself on the collective memory of our species, dressed in the language of gods and golden ages. The pole remains unanswered, but it is no longer silent. It hums with the weight of a question we have been asking since the first story was told around the first fire. Where did we come from? And in the chorus of global answers, the direction pointed to is always, consistently, the same. North. As the final chapter of our exploration begins to form, we must turn our gaze from the past to the present and the future, to the living legacy of the Hyperborean idea. This legacy is not a single thing. It is a spectrum of influence that colors fields as diverse as literature, art, environmental science, and the very way we conceptualize human resilience. In the realm of fiction, Hyperborea has proven to be fertile ground. It inspired the bleak, frozen worlds of H.P. Lovecraft's alien god-haunted plateaus and the heroic, savage north of Robert E. Howard's Conan the Barbarian stories, where ancient, crumbling cities hint at fallen grandeur. In modern fantasy, from video games to novels, the trope of the ancient, advanced civilization lost to time often wears a distinctly northern, icy cloak. It taps directly into the aesthetic and emotional core of the myth. Knowledge shrouded in blizzards, ruins peeking from glaciers, a past that is both magnificent and chillingly distant. Artists have been drawn to its imagery: the eternal sun, the solitary mountain at the axis, the merging of celestial and terrestrial glory, creating works that evoke a sublime, melancholy nostalgia for a world that never was. More concretely, the scientific rediscovery of a once green Arctic, driven by the Hyperborean quest's offshoots, has profoundly impacted our understanding of Earth's climate system. It has shown us the dynamism and fragility of our planet. The quest to find a lost world under the ice has, ironically, helped reveal the true story of our own world's dramatic history, proving that change is not only possible but catastrophic and routine on geological timescales. This knowledge is no longer myth. It is the bedrock of our current climate crisis understanding. The thaw that might reveal Hyperborean artifacts is the same thaw threatening coastal cities worldwide, creating a powerful, sobering symmetry. The myth has also become a mirror for our technological age. In an era where we can map the ocean floor and scan through ice, the idea that something could still be hidden is a check on our arrogance. It is a reminder that for all our satellites, the past is a foreign country, and its greatest secrets may be encrypted in forms we do not yet recognize. Hyperborea stands as the ultimate symbol of that undiscovered country. Furthermore, the story feeds into contemporary conversations about human origins and diffusion. As genetics and archaeology slowly, painstakingly rewrite the story of the peopling of the globe, the Hyperborean myth represents the wild card, the possibility of a forgotten branch in the human family tree. It keeps the narrative open, challenging any simplistic, linear version of progress. Ultimately, the legacy of Hyperborea is the legacy of the search itself. It is the embodiment of the human need to look beyond the horizon, to believe that history is deeper and stranger than the textbooks allow. It represents the romance of the unknown, a romance that has fueled exploration from the voyages of Pythias to the satellites circling today. The North Pole, once a literal blank space, is now physically mapped, but Hyperborea ensures it remains a metaphorical blank space, a canvas for our deepest questions about where we came from and what we have lost. The civilization may be a phantom, but the light it casts is real. It is the light of a midnight sun that never fully sets on the human imagination, illuminating not a forgotten city of gold, but the endless, beautiful, and haunting capacity of our own minds to dream of home, of catastrophe, and of a forgotten greatness whispering from the roof of the world. The story is over. The search continues. And as long as the ice holds its secrets and the human heart yearns for a lost paradise, Hyperborea will remain, forever just beyond the north wind.